Kuwait's brought in thousands of soldiers, women as well as men, something the Saudis, with their strict Islamic law, didn't like. They weren't used to having hundreds of foreign journalists in the country either.
Getting these men into the desert this quickly has been their biggest logistical operation since the Second World War. Fighting Iraq would be their biggest military test since Vietnam. They say they're ready.
I got to know a US Marine infantry unit. The men said they'd been told they were on the Kuwaiti border. In fact, they were at least an hour's drive inside Saudi Arabia. They wanted newspapers, as they had no idea what was going on outside the camp. Stupidly, it was dusk when I went back with a couple of bin bags of papers and magazines. "Geez," they said when I reached them, "you've had a lucky escape." We were locked and loaded, and we had the claymores ready. That's an anti-personnel mine. We didn't know, they said, what was coming down the track. No one did.
When the sun is high and hot, the Marines shelter in their tents, contemplating the prospect of suffering or inflicting sudden death, something they haven't faced so starkly before.
Doesn't faze me a bit. I've trained for it for over 4.5 years. I'm ready for it.
The American trucks were dark green, sprayed the colour of jungles and paddy fields from the war in Vietnam. Someone told me he'd seen vehicles that still had improvised repairs made out of flattened Vietnamese beer cans. Whoever sold the Americans the paint to turn their green vehicles the colour of sand must have made a fortune. One Palestinian businessman in the Gulf started his journey towards being a billionaire by selling the US Army oceans of bottled water. As for the British, they'd been so certain that their military moment in the Middle East was over that in the 1980s they sold their desert camouflage uniforms to the Iraqis. By the beginning of 1991, the Americans had 500,000 soldiers in the desert preparing for war. Offshore, alongside 6 aircraft carrier battle groups, were a couple of mighty World War II battleships, the Missouri and the Wisconsin, modernized to carry cruise missiles alongside their 16-inch naval guns. Watching it happen, I had the feeling that a great military giant, chastened since its defeat in Asia 15 years before, was shaking itself and waking up to fight again. Before the Kuwait crisis, the only permanent US foothold in the region was a naval base in Bahrain. But in 1990, the troops went into the Middle East, and one way and another they've never left. Even at times when numbers have been scaled back, huge quantities of pre-positioned equipment sits waiting for their return. Big powers have intervened in the Middle East to reshape it to their requirements since ancient times. It's strategically placed, connecting Europe with Asia and Africa. It's the home of the world's 3 great monotheistic religions, and for the last 100 years or so, great powers have needed its oil reserves, the biggest in the world. 2 imperial grandees created, and some say cursed, the modern Middle East when they carved up the Ottoman Empire at the height of the First World War. One was a French diplomat, Charles-François Georges-Picot. The other, Sir Mark Sykes, was British. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was designed to win the peace for Britain and France. It defined zones of influence in the Middle East for the 2 imperial powers. Borders of new states came later. But to win the war, the British had already made promises to the Arabs. The Sharif of Mecca, Hussein ibn Ali, led an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks. In return, he believed the British had promised him an independent Arab kingdom across much of present-day Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. Hussein kept his word. The duplicitous British did not. The requirements of empire came first. The promise of Arab self-determination was part of the collateral damage. Within 20 years, a Palestinian scholar referred to Sykes-Picot as a shocking document, the product of greed, stupidity, and double-dealing.